Let's try it again. When I say buenos, you say días. Buenos. Días. Buenos. Días. Thank you so much for being present on day 3. We have had 2 full days of lessons, blessings, and all good things. Thank you for everyone who's trickling in. We're getting ready to get started. Really exciting to see all the hashtags and all the posts online on social media, celebrating each and every one of you, and then seeing all the reposts and shares, and just, it's really exciting to celebrate and to let ourselves be seen. So very excited for that. Please keep them coming. To begin our morning session, we're going to dive into the topic, a new paradigm in brain health. Transcranial PBM improves brain performance and neuroplasticity. Please join me in welcoming subject expert Brooke McKeever, the Director of Provider Services for LightMD Incorporated. The stage is yours, Brooke.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. I'm so honored to be here with everyone, and thank you for sharing your time with me. And everyone's stories have been rather inspiring, so much so that I just wanted to start with a little deeper dive into myself and how that applies to photobiomodulation of the brain, which is known as PBM or Transcranial Photobiomodulation. We are light. So human, hue, man, it's light. We're of the solar system, solar, light, made of stardust. So we literally, it's been thought that we emit light as well. We need light for energy. Some of our energy comes from food, but a large proportion of that comes from light. So my story started with light a little bit before a traumatic accident in 2007, but I'll start there. So started with my cervical spine injury. And most people know about that story and the chronic debilitating pain that I experienced from it for a year and a half, and how that kind of changed the outcourse of what I'm doing now and my life. But what people do not know is the story of the neuroendocrine failure that occurred because of the chronic pain and because of the location in my neck for my injury and chronic inflammation. So shortly after 2007, after the accident, about 3 months, I started feeling changes in my body. I lost a ton of weight, and then I gained a ton of weight. Then I wasn't eating anything different. Yes, I was stressed. It was 2007, so the housing crisis was going on. There was just lots of stuff. And so having no job because I couldn't work because I was in pain, I could barely stand. Being in debt, and then losing weight, gaining weight. So my hormones were basically off. So that's my thyroid. So knowing a little bit about the endocrine system, your different organs and endocrine organs that are scattered throughout the body communicate with each other. So what was eventually explained to me, not from my doctor or any of the doctors that I saw, but through an endocrinologist that actually owned a light device, was that my thyroid most likely sent the signal to my pituitary gland that there was trauma. So fire, evacuate, freak out, everything is just sent in turmoil. And my neuroendocrine system shut down and went into shock. And so what that caused was me to go into ovarian failure. So I don't share that with a lot of people, but it is related, because it's also a story of neuroplasticity and how I was able to regain my health and my strength through my neuroplastic brain. Okay. So that's a little deeper dive on myself that I wanted to share, on how our ability to rewire and recreate not only our thoughts, our memories, our actions, but also our hormones, our innate biochemicals and neurotransmitters that our body creates, and also signals to the rest of our body to perform their optimal functions. So I'm going to go a little bit into cognitive disorders and how how cognitive disorders encompass a broad spectrum of neurological deficits. So this is talking about Alzheimer's and dementia. You can have Parkinson's, frontotemporal dementia, stroke-related cognitive dysfunction, and traumatic brain injury. In the US, in 2021, the cost for Alzheimer's and related care was $329 billion. In 2030, the costs are expected to exceed $1 trillion. And that's not even accounting for the cost of caregivers and families and the impacts of society. So that is a huge, huge tax on the economic impacts and society and how we're supposed to take care of these people. So basically, what can we do to prevent this? So there's neuropathy, so what and where matters in the brain. So each section of our brain, there's a different function. In the frontal lobe, we have cognition. If anybody stopped by for a brain boost yesterday or the day before, or putting into theta frequency, we treat the frontal lobe. Also where depression is, so we've got a study for there. That's your cognition, your motor, your memory. In the parietal lobe, we have perception. In the temporal, over here, we've got memory and audio. In the occipital, in the back, is where our vision is. In the hindbrain, memory and motor skills. In our brainstem and ears is our connection from the brain to the spinal cord. And that's where you found the autonomic nervous system and our metabolism. And then the ganglia, which are all interconnected, are interneural communications. And then the corpus callosum is where the right brain and the left brain communicate with each other. So there's different etiologies, and you can have MTBI, like concussions. You can have the stroke, hypoxia, where you're losing oxygen. It can be a pathogenic infection, like COVID, or even strep throat, which can turn into pandas in adolescence. It can be metabolic, or allergies and toxins, as well as congenital defects. Comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, atherosclerosis, inflammation, autoimmunity, and genetic factors. So as I was talking about today's cognitive health challenges, how are we going to combat the increased costs of Alzheimer's and dementia? Well, from my perspective, it's to prevent it. How do we prevent that? Oxygenation through the brain, exercising, using our brains and memories. But the best way that we've seen is actually neuroplasticity and neuromodulation through photobiomodulation. I've seen countless clients with both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and in each one, it does not take more than 1 to 3 sessions for them to feel a difference. They regain a little bit of memory. They regain some of their independence. They can regain, if it's Parkinson's, they're more balanced, which means that they're not a fall risk. If you have Parkinson's, the one thing that you're afraid of is falling, because if you fall, you could break a hip, and that leads to more and more health issues. You can hit your head, which is also bad. So you don't want to fall. You want to be able to continue your cognitive functions. And what we've seen with photobiomodulation is that it is absolutely helping to repair and to regenerate those nerves and connectivity. So neuropathic cognitive impairment is a pervasive and growing public health crisis. And that's not just with Alzheimer's and dementia-related diseases, but with CTE, as we're experiencing with athletes and people in the NFL who have retired and basically can't have a career past 28, maybe 30, and then suffer a lifetime because of the chronic impacts and hits that they have sustained to the body. And each time somebody has a concussion and sustains a brain injury, it actually, the next time that they have impact on the brain, it requires a lower G-force to make them concussed again. So you're lowering you're lowering the resistance of your brain, and it's becoming more and more damaged because of chronic inflammation. And the effects of TBI can last for months, if not years. And as it lasts, there's more and more scar tissue that develops, and it's slower to heal because of the chronic inflammation in the brain. And that can settle in different parts, and because it often depends on where the person is concussed. I went through this personally, and because I have a light device, I didn't go to the hospital right away. When I fainted from 5'10", onto the asphalt, got a big knot in my head. And while my husband's freaking out, I'm like, well, we got the light machine. Let's just see what happens. I'm not bleeding. I'm not bleeding, you know. I have a huge egg, but I'm not bleeding. I should be all right. And so literally, while he's staring at me all night like this, just nervous, I'm just in and out doing the light and watching. And it was a learning experience because before that, I had the experience of working with Dr. Leahy, and who I'll go into, and he's the team doctor for the San Francisco 49ers. So he did a lot of our concussion studies and then also wrote a paper on it for the NFL, which they ignored. So knowing about it and treating them are completely different than having that experience yourself. So while I had the pads on, I'm starting with a high frequency just to calm the brain down. And I start seeing the stars get bigger, the circle of stars, and I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. There's all these rainbows, like, this isn't so bad. But then I was watching, as the frequencies changed, and I started lowering frequencies, some sound got louder, the stars, things were changing. I was like taking notes. I'm like, all right, this is good to know. And literally, I was able to sleep. My husband was not able to sleep that night. But the next night, the next day, I just took it easy, sat by the pool, and then we were out of town, so I ended up going to a concert the next night and stayed in my seat because just balance and my husband. And everything was fine. I actually recovered pretty quickly. I'd say most of my symptoms, except for the sensitivity in the eyes, most of those were gone within a few days. I ended up seeing a functional neurologist who helped me and told me to keep doing my light and that I was way beyond where I was supposed to. So that gave me another insight, not something that I would like, but in addition to the neuroendocrine, to have the MTBI, to be able to help my clients better and to understand what they're going through. So another common brain neurological etiologies are stroke. And we have a lot of experience with that as well. And if you can get light and photobiomodulation on the brain and the body after a stroke, you're going to significantly reduce the long-term damage. And I have another interesting case about that, which was an aborted stroke. And that was a client who rented one of our systems, and she was able to work on her father. Well, her son was getting treatment for PANDAS, which is another neurological condition. He was better within 8 sessions, so she ended up renting the system, working on his twin, working on her father who had Parkinson's. She did pads across the chest and the heart, across the heart and chest, and also in the brain, brainstem and ears. And the following morning before she returned the system, she said that her father, her mom called her and said, I'm going to take your father to the emergency room. He's kind of lucid. He's mumbling a few words. We're just going to go get it checked out. It was a Sunday morning. A few hours later, he was still in the hospital, but he was feeling better. He was talking normal. He was trying to leave. He was like, there's nothing wrong. Whatever it was an episode. They continued and they went to their specialist on Monday. After analyzing all the tests and the studies, the cardiologist determined that he had what was called an aborted stroke. So he said, your daughter, whatever she did with that circulatory event, saved your life, saved you from a catastrophic stroke where you would have not been able to talk or walk. So that was a profound and an aha moment in not only treating the stroke after it happens, but in prevention. If somebody is predisposed for having a stroke or heart or brain issues, why wouldn't we address that before it becomes a problem? If it's in your family history, do some light on the brain. Increase the circulation, help the brain. If we're not getting enough sleep, this is going to help you sleep. If you're not clearing out the tau proteins, helping the body and the brain, the natural mechanisms to do the process and the phagocytosis and the clearing that you need and the regenesis, neurogenesis to be able to help to healthily function and to avoid these costly diseases. So there is, unfortunately, with most treatment options, there's not a lot of therapeutic options. There's some medications that are good to delay Parkinson's, but there's also Parkinson's cases that are non-responsive to medications. And for Alzheimer's, there's really nothing that they can do. So introducing LightMD photobiomodulation. Our pads are designed and are medical grade silicone to comfortably and flexibly fit around the brain. So we use what's called a cervical collar. It looks like a neck pad. I think it's on this next slide. No, it's a cervical collar, it's a neck pad, but it can also be used as a headband. So that, being that it's skin contact, it's able to penetrate deep into the skull, through the corpus callosum and into the brain, specifically on whichever lobe that you're treating. So I wanted to show this slide that Richard showed the other day, and the timeline of mechanisms of action is because in the first one right here, you see that neuromodulation actually occurs within 10 minutes. And we saw that if anybody tried the brain treatments yesterday, I know Ryan tried the 40 hertz, and he said he was laying back, he was just kind of chilling with his eyes open. He had it on his vagus nerve, because I know that's big for Ryan, and then he had the headband on. And I said, oh, just kick back, you'll feel it. And literally in about 10 minutes, he was kind of like this, and he popped up. And it was like, I think that's what I was supposed to feel. And so it was 40 hertz is a commonly studied frequency. You can look it up. There's hundreds of thousands of articles on PubMed, but in 40 hertz, it's widely studied that it improves memory. And so this is being used for Alzheimer's and dementia diseases. And that is going to be applied to the frontal lobe of the brain. So working on the Alzheimer's, we work on the frontal lobe. For Parkinson's, it's a disease of the brainstem. So we're working on the brainstem and the ears, getting deep into the brain for the balance and for that connectivity. So down there in the corner, you'll see the light pad that I'm referring to, which is a neck pad that can be used as a cervical collar. Because our LightMD light pads cover such a wide area, over 1,200 centimeters squared, and the amount of LEDs in it, which is over 1,200, we have really a tremendous amount of energy, not too much, just right, but enough to create a photobiological effect. Does light penetrate the cranial skull? Yes. So it's both near infrared and red that penetrates the skull. And as you can see, in each lobe, depending on the thickness of the skull, it varies on how much red and infrared light it can penetrate. So where you have the left parietal skull one, that has a larger difference between the red and the infrared. And studies confirm this, that both red and infrared can reach the brain. While the majority of the treatments we do are, and they're all pulsed frequencies, they are near infrared. Starting with red light is never a bad idea to get the cells in communication with each other. So the modalities of LightMD transcranial photobiomodulation. By precisely controlling the irradiance, which is the power, the luminance, which is the energy, and the pulse modulation frequency, which is the frequency of the actual blink of the pulse, which is received by the cells, because everything has a frequency. The Mark II is able to target neurons, specifically non-invasively delivering 3 distinct therapeutic modalities to the brain. That's where we have neurological repair, neuromodulation, and brain entrainment. So the frequency dependence of photobiomodulation is basically if we're talking about low frequency, mid frequency, or high frequency. For low frequencies, that's where you get entrainment. So that's what I'm talking about if we're going to help or coax the brain waves to theta frequency, to gamma frequency, or to alpha frequency, or even if you want to go in the opposite direction to sleep, into delta. So higher frequencies are used, and it's a different mechanism. That's similar with tissue repair, analgesia, homeostasis. So the LightMD system allows us to do all of these things. You can do them independently. You can do one day you can do low frequencies, another day you can do high frequencies. And that versatility allows anyone who's doing it to really adjust to the frequencies that they or their client or their loved one or their patient really needs. Because no one is the same. And everyone in their diseased or injured state is at a different level, and also at a different level and a stage every day. And as your healing progresses, you want to be able to adjust and not do the same therapy. Or if somebody is not responsive or too responsive to a certain frequency, then you want to change it. And so that precise flexibility and customized control for each different client, for me, or patient, allows the LightMD Mark II system to be the most versatile and flexible system, not only for the body, but for the brain as well. We have many, many case studies of LightMD and transcranial PBM. So concussion studies through Dr. Leahy, who is a chiropractor in Los Gatos, and he was working with the San Francisco 49ers for 25 years. He's also the chiropractor that worked with the Olympic athletes and the Chinese swimmers who developed our protocol for sports and also for musculoskeletal indications. So concussion, we have 140 of those case studies. Major depressive syndrome, we have one of those, and that's going to be written up in December. So we're very excited. That study is out of Taiwan. Stroke, we have 10 cases. Alzheimer's and dementia, we have 10 so far. And pathogenic infections for COVID, like we were speaking about yesterday, we have 20 of those. For Lyme disease as well. Lyme disease affects the brain, the body, and long COVID as well. And so both of those conditions can be affected and treated differently through the body. And then also neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and lupus. The one case of lupus is really fascinating to me. It's a family friend of Jeff and I's, and she had a hypoxic event. So it was during COVID. This young lady, she's in her young 20s, I believe she was 24 at the time. She had to drop out of college. She had lupus. Her body was attacking itself. Multiple surgeries. She had an incision from her sternum down to the pubic bone, her gut, her kidneys, everything. She was on dialysis. So during COVID, just one day, it was totally random, but she had a hypoxic event. Her oxygen went down to 48. Her father rushed her to the hospital. By the time she got to the hospital, she was basically in a coma. And she had a lack of oxygen, and she was having strokes, she was having seizures so much that she was levitating off of the bed. And it was during COVID, and so the hospital procedures, her dad couldn't go in there with her. Her mom showed up to the hospital. She refused to not be out of the room with her. And she actually had to witness her daughter with these strokes and levitating and them trying to just hold her down. So after she was released from the hospital, about 2 weeks later, she had continuous myoclonic jerks. And so myoclonic jerks are just short little jerk moves that are uncontrollable due to the lack of oxygen that she had in her brain. So we have her scans and her images because her mom shared all of her data with us, and she's very encouraged. So she acquired a light device from us and started working on her daughter immediately when she returned from the hospital. Started working on the brain, the kidneys, the whole body, because lupus is an autoimmune. So really everything needs support. About 3 months later, she went back to the hospital and got more MRIs. Well, to their surprise, but not to ours, most of the white spots in her brain had filled in with healthy tissue. There was a pituitary tumor that she had that was approximately 1 centimeter, and the next image showed that there was not a pituitary tumor. Now, the doctors, when approached by this, they said that, well, maybe the MRI and the imaging was a different angle and that they couldn't see it. I said, okay, that's an interesting approach. So no problem. What the point there is that it is going deep into the brain. It is making impacts. Today, that young woman, she just got a kidney transplant, so she's completely off of dialysis, but she is healthy. She has no myoclonic jerks. She is walking on her own. She's out of a wheelchair, and now 3 years later, she even has a boyfriend. She went to Disneyland and walked the whole park. So she's able to live somewhat of a normal life again. And her life is actually sustained by the LightMD device. So much so that she didn't realize how impactful it was until she dropped the system and it had to get shipped back and repaired, and she didn't have it for about a week and a half. And that's when I got a voice message from her. And she said, I honestly didn't realize how much my body was depending on this extra energy from the light to keep me going. Thank you so much for what you've done and how you've impacted my life and my brain health. So hearing that and being able to help somebody who's actually helping herself, we've empowered her to use the light to self-heal. So not only can these devices be used by clinics, physicians, and hospitals, but in everyday people like you and me. I use this device when I have a concussion. I use it if I get a headache. I use it on my neck and my back all the time, or if I have brain fog. So there's not a limit to the light that you can do for yourself or your loved ones to prevent further damage. If you want to restore homeostasis, the easiest way to do it is through light. It's the most natural. So here's another young lady who said, after receiving my first light session, it was like a complete 180. I was more myself, my energy increased, I was able to focus and remember a lot better. I was really impressed. So this is a young woman who sustained a head injury at a Girl Scout camp when she was on summer break from college. And she sustained it on the first day. And so when she returned, she basically threw off, and she was the camp leader. So she was out of sorts, and after only 1 day of receiving the light, she was completely different. So I really want to express also the impact that getting light on an injury, an illness, or inflammation immediately can actually take down the long-term effects because you're addressing the inflammation right away. And we're not taking away the inflammation, you're speeding up the inflammatory response, the body's natural inflammatory response to heal itself. So in our 145 cases, car collisions, sports, there's positive outcomes in 142, 98%. So the methodology includes using the LightMD technology, frontal lobe or top of lobe or brainstem ears. We also address the injury itself and the location on the brain. There's subjective assessments, so patient self-reporting, what they're feeling, if their sensitivities. Also acute concussion evaluation. You can take an objective measurements through an EEG, and Dr. Leahy has created something that he called the Leahy Concussive Index. And that is a measure to quantitatively measure concussions based on the randomness that is occurring. So when they're doing an EEG, the patterns are they're non-linear. So instead of when we're thinking how it's organized and complex, when you're concussed, everything is chaos in the brain. And so being able to measure that was something that Dr. Leahy figured out. And instead, there were systems of measuring in non-linear signal processing, such as the Higuchi fractal dimension and the Shannon entropy, and EEG scaling. But neither of those actually measured from the baseline to concussive and back again what the differences were and how to measure that. And so Dr. Leahy created this. And with his patients treated, they were able to reduce the negative symptoms and decrease the concussive index by 5 to 29%, mostly after only 1 session. So imagine what that does for chronic people with not only chronic and long-term or repeated head injuries, but think about pee-wee football players. This should be with every sports team. This should be in high school football players because that is where they are resilient the most. It's like, oh, concussion, and how many high schoolers are really going to be aware or responsive to the fact that they may have gotten hit in the head? That's something that they're going to take with them to college sports and potentially professional sports is going to stay with them and damage their future because of the impact and the future of more and less G-force required and the next impact. So Leahy's concussive index has been a valuable tool for us. And for sports teams, what they do is when they get freshmen in or new teammates, they basically do the LCI and get a baseline measurement. Now, he can't get them when they're in high school, but once they became professional, or college, but once they became professional. So that's why this is so important to start taking these brain measurements and evaluations, not only in college, but in high school, where they really start hitting hard. I mean, I can just imagine right now, I'm from Texas, but from a 5A school where Drew Brees was our quarterback. And so I can just see like the linemen and the size of them in my high school and like the way that they were hitting people. And that was just fun. And so that was something, and back in the day in the 80s, they weren't considering brain injuries and long-term, and CTE wasn't even a term that they were using. So back to the slide that Richard had showed also on depressive syndrome and our study out of Taiwan. So before TPBM, you can see the areas of blue. That's very low oxygen. After TPBM, you can see the difference, oxygenated, and there's the changes. So increasing oxygenation to the brain allows your tissues to be oxygenated. We need oxygen. It's essential for us to survive. Also for the neural connectivity, you can see before and after, and the increase in neural connectivity. So a few Alzheimer's case studies that are super profound for us is, one is an 80-year-old female with advanced Alzheimer's. She was unable to care for herself, recognize family members, or comprehend her surroundings. She made a full recovery of cognitive and motor skills in 8 weeks after commencing Light Doctor in Taiwan. She's now playing mahjong without assistance. This is what inspired the hospital to not only implement the Light device in every department, but to do the studies for stroke and Alzheimer's, so that they're initiating the study, and it was based on the hospital director's own mother. Second case, a 93-year-old female, it's Jeff and I's case, living in a 4-year assisted living memory care unit. She was unable to remember the many countries she traveled in her life. After 11 bi-weekly sessions, so neck pad in front of the brain and 1 pad in the back of the brain, not only was she able to remember her favorite country she had traveled, but she went to her neurologist for a regular 6-month checkup. Well, immediately after the neurologist appointment, I get a call. Hi, this is Dr. Clark. I was wondering, what are you doing there? I said, oh, thank you, Dr. Clark. You're actually one of the first doctors that's called me after their patients responded with some significant improvement. Well, this lady at 93 years old had actually improved on her cognitive dementia exam and improved by 4 points. So, and that was something that they were taking measurements every 6 months for the past 4 years. So not only did the neurologist purchase the device for her patients, but the family of our client purchased the device to help her avoid going into further memory care, but also so that the entire family could benefit from it. Another case that's very impactful was a case of PSP. Am I out of time? Okay. So as a 64-year-old, PSP is a type of Parkinson's that's non-responsive to medications. It's a rare neurodegenerative disorder. So this man, it's causing dysfunction in speech, movement, walking, balance, vision, swallowing, eye movement. So his physician in Los Angeles gave him 6 to 8 months to live. It's also very fast acting. He came 3 days a week for 2 weeks. It was an hour-and-a-half drive each way. After basically 3 sessions, his wife said, every time we come home, it's like I have my husband back. He's able to speak to me. He's able to handle business on the phone because he can talk. He can walk, and he's still going golfing today. His doctor that he went back to, they ended up purchasing a machine as well. His doctor said, I have no end date for you. I can't tell you what it's going to be. Keep living your life. So these are some cases that were already neurodegenerative, that were able to regain neuroplasticity, regain function, regain memory, and help the body to heal itself through photobiomodulation. And since I'm out of time, this is how you can find us. You can see us at the Light Lounge. Come by for a TPBM session, or come by for a body session. You can email me, find me on LinkedIn. I'm active on social for my clinic. We see lots of pictures of people doing light and animals, and we love doing podcasts and events, retreats. Light can fit into anybody's life. It's just about figuring out how, and we'd love to help you figure out how we can help it fit into your lives. Thank you, everyone.